We know all of you have felt the pain of phishing attacks that seem to be increasing in complexity and frequency. You're not alone. Next, we're going to be joined by Tim Fitzgerald, CISO at Arm. Tim's going to talk to us about the unique defensive controls that he uses at his organization, and he's going to put them in the context of a ransomware attack that he recently encountered.
Thanks, Kelly, and welcome everybody. I'm Henry, and I head up customer success here at Tessian. Now, we all know how prominent phishing attacks are becoming in the enterprise. Last year, 88% of organizations globally experienced some form of phishing attack. And COVID hasn't helped this at all. Whether it's a Zoom impersonation or a government stimulus spoof, the attacker's approach is constantly changing. That makes it a moving target for security teams and something that is increasingly hard to solve. Today, I'm joined by Tim Fitzgerald, the CISO at Arm. Arm, of course, need no introduction. In fact, they're probably powering many of the devices that you're tuning in to today's sessions from. And they're a customer of ours that have been a huge strategic partner to us over the last few years. From a security perspective, one of the things that really jumps out at me about Tim's team and Arm's progressive approach is how they empower employees to make smart decisions. Now, that's no mean feat when you have over 8,000 employees across the world. So I'm excited to dig in a little bit to that today with Tim about how he's coping with the ever-increasing landscape of phishing attacks. So let's kick off. Tim, first up, how are the company and all of your employees coping in this relatively new landscape of fully remote work?
Yeah, it's a great question to kick off with because I think it's really been difficult. I mean, I think for most companies, what we found is that our employees are actually quite productive. They're able to do their jobs. I mean, we are fortunate that we are a technology-based company, and so many of our employees are used to working remote in some form or fashion. So they're coping well from a productivity perspective. What we're finding actually is that they're less happy, which is an interesting paradigm because while people have tremendous flexibility, they're missing all of kind of the small bits of interaction that they're having at work. And so they're finding other ways to fill that void through connectivity online, which for us means that they're using all kinds of interesting technology to connect with each other, and in some cases creating new risks that we hadn't even thought about.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective. I'm actually today in the office for the first time after lockdown, and I can't explain how energizing it is. And I can completely see that at home it becomes a bit monotonous after a while. Tim, I gave the audience a few teasers in my intro, but I'd love for you just to take a few minutes to explain a bit about your security ethos at Arm.
Yeah, I think we have to start our security ethos. I think is actually, as you said, I think it is progressive, right? We really do try and figure out how we work with the people that we support rather than doing security to them. But you have to start with kind of Arm's ethos. Arm is the most high trust organization that I've ever been a part of or actually seen. My previous roles at Symantec, I got to talk to so many people about how they run their security programs. And Arm lives and breathes the ideology that we trust our people. It's a huge part of our success over the last 30 years is the amount of collaboration and sharing that we do that drives innovation and sparks new ideas within the company. And so you can't undo that, and nor would we want to, even if we could. But that represents a huge amount of challenge for us around how do you share and collaborate and be incredibly open and trusting to our employees when we see them making sort of fundamental and basic mistakes that cause us, real data loss or impact our partners or in some cases even mean that we lose real money. So rather than kind of fight the tide on that and try and undo that level of trust or reel back access that people have, what we've actually done is embrace it and said, we do trust you. And by and large, everyone is acting in the best interest of our organization. So we're going to try and harness that and actually make you an extended part of our security team. And rather than do security to you, we're going to make you part of the solution. So Tessian was an interesting purchase for us because it was probably the first technology in my career where it was very purposely bought for the benefit of our employees as opposed to the security behind the employees, meaning that this actually gave us the ability to put the power back into the people's hands and make good decisions in moments in time, which we trust them to do. They don't always get it right, but the vast majority of the time they do. And the more tools and the more information that we can give them to work with, the better they're getting at kind of recognizing the threats that come external, but actually, probably more importantly for us in terms of not making sort of the natural human errors, the foot faults, we call them, that make up the vast majority of the things that go wrong in our company from a security perspective.
Yeah, it's something that we often speak about, which is security for the people rather than security to the people, and empowering employees to make the right decisions. I think where a lot of it comes down to is people now know the importance of data. You don't have to be in security to understand how important data is, not least because the coverage it gets and how much you see it, in tabloid newspapers. But I think that giving employees the right information to then make smart decisions about what they're doing is such a great way to have this democratized security where people are they're taking accountability for their actions, but you're assisting them, helping make that decision.
Yeah, the vast majority of people will make the right decision, excuse me, the right decision with the right data. And one of the interesting bits of this, though, is some people won't. And our ability to understand who those people are, or when they might be heading in the direction where their habits or just the way that they're operating are actually creating risk for us that we hadn't previously understood, is a huge win for us. So if we can separate out the 99% who are well intentioned and we give great information to, and they're getting better and better over time, from the 1% of people who maybe are operating a little more carelessly than we would want them to, perhaps maliciously, but probably not. They're more just kind of patterns and set in their ways. We can then have direct, real human intervention in those scenarios, and have a conversation with those people that is generally quite impactful. So, we think about this program not only as a means of trying to serve data up so that people can help themselves, but actually a program that gives us data back that helps us figure out where we really need to focus on changing behavior, versus, we're kind of rounding around the edges.
Yeah, it's. I know that you and I have chatted about this before, but it's an amazingly powerful thing to be able to think about. The risk score that each individual has based on the interactions that they've had, and I know that we've been working on some stuff around that, and looking forward to seeing where that goes. But it really helps you zone in on the areas where you need to focus. What's interesting, what I'm interested in, Tim, is I certainly, from my experience at least. And some of the things that I see out there with different companies in the market is that sometimes tech-savvy employees or tech-savvy users can sometimes almost think that they're a little bit immune to some of these, let's say phishing attacks, because they, whether it be you're a security engineer, for example, and you understand email, but the reality is it's becoming so complex that actually you probably can't necessarily always suss it out. Do you ever have that problem at Arm? Obviously, dealing with quite a technical workforce, that people sometimes think they're fallible, and actually they're not. They're not, with how advanced the attacks have got.
Yeah. I mean, it's such an interesting place to work. We have more than 6,000 engineers out of our 8,000 employees, and these are, some of these people literally invented silicon chips, right? So, their level of technical astuteness is unbelievable. And interestingly, the problem seems to be spread actually pretty evenly across our company. We don't have huge swings in terms of who's more susceptible and who's not. But what that means is that our engineering community is just as susceptible as everybody else. They don't love to hear that. And actually, at Arm, it's a little bit easy to make this a competitive thing between the engineering groups to make sure that they're not the ones falling for this. So we certainly take advantage of that. But there are technically astute people who are at the point where they're reading email headers as they come in to check out where they're coming from. Right? We can't even do phishing tests with them because they know how to dissect everything, and they can pull it apart. But those are not the people we worry about. Is the people who have sort of their overconfidence in their technical ability means that they're not paying attention to the social cues that can sometimes trip them up. So our most successful phishing test, for example, for the engineering community, was last year in the December timeframe. We sent a Secret Santa sign-up list, and the click rate on that was unbelievably bad in terms of the number of people who would fall for something like that. And what that showed us, in addition to some of the other data we collect from the various toolings that we use, is the very obvious ones they're good at detecting. Even the ones that are trickier and kind of more financially motivated, where they can suss out what's behind the thing that people are asking for, they're quite good at looking for. The things that appear to come from their peers and are more social in nature is actually what's tripping a lot of our engineers up. And so while they have this sort of technical astuteness, and if they wanted to, they could very easily break this down and figure out whether this was real and not real. Most people don't operate that way, right? They're operating from a level of convenience. They're moving fast, and so something comes into their inbox that appears to be from one of their peers in a contextually appropriate situation is compelling, and we see them we see them falling for that again and again.
That's so interesting, and I think you're right. It's ultimately a time thing, isn't it? Because even the most astute, the most astute engineer may be able to deconstruct an email and see exactly what IP address it's come from, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, people aren't paid to spot phishing attempts in their inbox. They're paid to do their job, and we need to kind of not to overburden them with like that thing of like, oh, you should have been able to spot that. Actually, give them the tools in order to be like enable them to do their job.
Yes.
Interesting. Going a bit deeper on that in terms of phishing, one of the things, and I know we've spoken about this previously, Tim, but one of the things that we saw during COVID, and it's still continuing, in fact, is, and with all of the change that we're seeing across the market, is a pretty sharp increase in really targeted spear phishing attacks. Now, whether that be from impersonations of individuals, whether it be impersonation, Zoom is one of the biggest ones that we're seeing at the moment. What are you seeing from your side in terms of phishing landscape and how that's evolved?
Yeah, it's been really interesting times, and so the COVID stuff hasn't actually had that huge an impact on us. I mean, certainly the volume has gone up, and the types of attempts have changed a little bit, but it doesn't seem to be sort of categorically different than what we saw pre-COVID. We have seen some interesting things recently, though, right? So we were part of that email attack that was sort of widely publicized about 2 months ago, where allegedly Russian hacking groups are coming after major U.S. companies at scale. So we've seen really pretty sophisticated setups where new domains are created, a whole bunch of variants of emails are put through. They're quite targeted in terms of how they're trying to interact with people, suggesting that they know somebody they know, et cetera, in a way that many of the filters are not able to kind of keep up and pick up with the volume of what we're seeing. And because we had a few people click through, or at least start the initiation of the process to click through with that bad actor, we've now seen them come back repetitively again and again and again to try and change their tactics to see if they can hook onto the same folks. And these are situations where the end goal is to put in some very serious ransomware that could be hugely impactful to our company. They're not looking for one machine at a time; they're looking for our whole infrastructure. So it has taken on new importance for us. We know that this is the source of most attacks, but the implications of them being successful right now are not, maybe we sent an erroneous payment for a PO. We're now at the point where, maybe this stops us from being able to produce product for our customers. It's hugely impactful. Interestingly, just yesterday, we saw our first, what we would consider to be an approach to deep faking, impersonating our CEO, a WhatsApp message through to one of our staff with a custom crafted voice message from our CEO directing them to move some money around. Fairly compelling in terms of how real it sounded, using images that they were able to take from the internet of our CEO in various situations, and in theory, kind of cutting some stuff together to create a fairly compelling message on a channel that we're not even monitoring because it's not part of our technology stack. So I think, things are evolving pretty quickly. We suspected that this was going to happen at some point, but I'm still surprised to see it, in real life. And so I think we're now at a point where not only are the messages becoming more targeted, but the way in which they're being constructed are becoming more compelling, and using different mediums to deliver inside and outside of email in a way that's just making our life harder from a detection perspective.
Yeah, and I think especially being of the stature and profile that Arm are, you're at the forefront in terms of the most sophisticated actors looking at an organization, and we see it across all industries where actually they can detect where they think is going to be the most lucrative, or for Arm, it's you can get a lot of data about Arm on the web, and they can build profiles really compellingly to then go and target your users. How do you in terms of when you're defending against the risk of phishing, and obviously you're defending against the forefront of the most sophisticated attacks out there? Would love for you to share a little bit about the approach that you've taken to try and stem that risk, and how that's played out.
I mean, I think most people talk to in this call, right? We still subscribe to the defense in depth methodology, right? So we have a series of technology that we put out there to try and help our staff, from sort of very basic email filtering to more advanced detection capabilities. But the thing that I think the thing that has proved to be the most valuable to us is not only arming our people to be able to detect and figure out when something is bad, but actually making them feel accountable to being part of our extended security team. Meaning, if you tell us about this, there's a good chance there's a few hundred other people who are impacted by the same thing who may not have been as astute as you. And so we've created this community, actually of a bunch of people who are highly interested in helping us inoculate our environment from various types of attacks. So that has been hugely positive for us. And in fact, that same attack that I just referred to previously, I would like to say that our technology picked it all up, but actually it was our people who told us about it first. That was our first glimpse of the fact that this was happening. We then obviously could see it through our technology stack and make changes to help inoculate ourselves and limit the harm. But it just sort of demonstrated the power of putting the people at the forefront, not as the target, but actually as part of the solution, to help us identify in real time what's happening. So we are, like every company, we are still quite reliant on our technology to be successful. There's in those attacks, we still rely on various other control areas to kind of catch things as they're happening in real time. So even if somebody does fall for the link and click through and do those things, we still expect some of our technology to pick up with that. And we see that, right? But you're kind of getting down to closer and closer and closer to controls not functioning, right? So the idea that we can pick it up on the front end through human interaction and their own observation powers is really beneficial for us catching these things much earlier in the track.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about that is that technology can play that role, which, Tessian, for example, I know that, in your use of like the Defender platform, those in the moment educational reminders and prompts to users, it like increases awareness in a way which is very relevant to them. And therefore you're equipping them to, because you're right, like, ultimately humans are always going to be a layer of defense that you need to rely on, because technology is never going to catch everything before it gets to humans. But if you can raise that awareness and make people more plugged into the kind of things that they should be looking for, then it's a really nice like accountability and security culture that you can drive within the organization.
Indeed. I mean, right now we're talking about email, but actually this extends further, right? So my team dislikes it when I talk about this, but I view security engagement with people as a bit of a marketing program. It's like, can you get them to pick up the stick of gum at the checkout stand? So will they make that decision in the moment in time? Will they actually stop and say, there's a decision to be made here. I can do X or I can do Y, and one is worse from a security perspective. We've been pretty successful in part by using Tessian to create those moments in time around email, but actually it extends further, right? Because what we're trying to do is have people just capture that thought when they're doing other activities, right? Are they moving data? Are they interacting with a customer over the telephone? Do they know who they are? Are they about to send a payment? Can you get them to just take that breath and say, like, is this a good decision? And so I think creating those moments in time around email is hugely important, because that's definitely, our vector. It's the same as everybody else, right? The primary vector of how things come in. But our goal is to extend that further, right? Is to create those moments in time and create that trigger in their brain, so that as they're about to do something, particularly with data or money, depending on how they're moving it, that they just take a breath and they think, what's expected of me here? Do I know what I'm doing? Do I feel confident? And what we find is, people want to do well in this, right? So it's not hard to motivate them, as you pointed out. It's not, you don't have to convince people security is important. The question is, do they know what to do, and do they take just enough time to think about it, as opposed to just doing? And we find, that when we see the light kind of go on for people like that, we can convert somebody from a problem to an advocate, and in some cases an evangelist, right? Which is a huge thing.
I think what's so interesting about that is that in many respects, like the role of the security team, it's not, like there is a huge element of it, which is building advocates across the organization, bringing people on that journey in security. As you said, like it's marketing to an extent. It's like building that program, which is probably a skill set 5 years ago you probably wouldn't associate with a security arm of an organization. Super interesting. Sorry, Tim, super interesting. And unfortunately, we're coming to time. The one thing that I kind of like, the last point that I wanted to touch on is the ability for, once driving accountability amongst your your user base. So actually, once they've started interacting with, let's say, Tessian and the different prompts that they're seeing, being able to see summaries of like, hey, here's how you've performed. And almost like, you mentioned the competitive, like gamifying a little bit. Would love to understand, like, I know we're kind of chatting about that at the moment, but like, how does that further solidify the like ethos of driving accountability and a positive security culture?
Yeah, I mean, ARM is a hugely data hungry organization, right? So engineers in particular just love to consume data, even about themselves. So the idea that we can serve back to them how they're faring in a fair and non-punitive fashion, right? So this is not you and your manager getting a report card; it's you're getting a report card of your performance over the last period of time around detection of, unfortunate emails, how you work with data, maybe even how you badge in and out of the building, depending on how we want to look at it. The idea that we can give them context to work from that will give them like real things to think about and how they improve their personal performance is really compelling. And we've been working, as we've been working on this for some time. I very much view Tessian as our current part of our solution, but actually the way that you guys are thinking about the ability to show that back, not only as sort of a summary report card, but actually in real moments in time, it is one of the reasons that we find your company so attractive and we continue to work with you guys, right? So the product as it stands today is great. Where you're thinking about heading actually is incredibly useful in terms of how we choose to interact with our employees and what we think is going to make a successful ecosystem of security as opposed to a security team and everybody else. So it's a hyper relevant conversation, that human layer security. It's also not a trivial problem, right? The idea that how you want to serve that back to people in a way that they find useful and not accusatory and
Yeah.
will drive real changes in behavior is not a simple problem. And so I think you guys are at the forefront of thinking about how do we actually modify behavior at a moment in time. And that, I mean, it's not entirely a marketing program. There's psychology and sociology and a whole bunch of other stuff in there, right? But it's not a standard black and white security technical problem. This is very much about changing human behavior, and it's a hard thing to do.
I think that's a great line to end it on. Tim, it's always a pleasure and very energizing speaking to yourself and also working with your team. Really looking forward to continuing the journey and building out on some of those things that we just discussed on. That's all we have time for today. Thank you to everyone who has dialed in from home. Kelly, back to you.